and he is very well versed in Indian traditions, apart from his uh, distinguished academic roles that he played in the field of geoengineering, and also, leading several investigation missions of the major earthquakes. Sir, the platform is yours. We are eagerly awaiting to listen to your talk.
Thank you so much, Dr. Sridharamurthy. I would like to share my screen. Yeah. Dr. Krishnadas Nair, Professor Sridharamurthy, Dr. Karisiddappa, Dr. Dwarka Das, other dignitaries, and the two dignitaries, Sharma and Dr. Manna, who are left. It's a great pleasure for me to make a brief presentation on a topic which is nearer to my heart, no doubt, but I'm not an expert on that. Well, it is the same thing as telling we love this country, but when you have to talk about the country, there's going to be a lot of difficulties. It becomes complex. But I couldn't say no to Dr. Nair when he came to my office personally and said, I have to say a few words on this. He had something in his mind, I know. I don't know whether I will be able to bring that out. But I have already heard Professor Manna and Professor Sharma, who have touched upon the ancient education system to some extent. And just the previous two speakers, Dr. Sharma once again, and then Dr. Rath, have brought out how complicated the modern education system is. What I mean by that is, the education system we are running, the higher education system, which is actually the Macaulay system, as it would be called by some critics, for the last nearly 200 years. And in any case, the National Education Plan, which has come up, wants to introduce some of the older Indian ethos also into this education system, so that the country becomes once again known for its education and as a knowledge society grow further. I have taken the liberty to make a presentation somewhat subjective, even though I have kept the title as it is what Dr. Nair had given me. So first, I will say a few words about ethics, because it is the ethics that previous people have also spoken. And my work becomes simple because the basic concept of what is behind ethics, or the meaning of the word ethics, has already been brought out quite well. But in the context of the Gurukulas, where I would like to show a few slides on the concept and the practice and evolution of the Gurukulas over maybe 3,000 years or 4,000 years. What are the issues that are involved? And at least to understand whether it is possible to implement all of that in our new system, I do not know. But that is a point for further discussion. See, the student-teacher relationship, or what we may call the education system as it is a three-way interactive process. The society, the culture, religion, history, the patrons or the kings in ancient times, the family values, the belief systems, they form one important corner, one important support. Then, the student is the other corner and the teacher is the other corner or the pillar. These three forces interact to produce what you may call an ethical environment. And in fact, Sharma was mentioning about an eco-environment or an ego environment. Now, whatever it is, an environment gets produced out of it. And in the Indian context, generally ethics is called dharma. As you would already you'd be knowing as internal to the culture, there are 3 or 4 important aspects in the life of an Indian, that is dharma, artha, kama, and moksha. At least the dharma is the first part, which is going to be about personal contact, the physical and emotional, and how one interacts with the other persons in the society. Now, as far as the Indian education system, the Gurukula system is concerned, we have to get a concept of what is a Gurukula, what we have in our mind, first of all. Now, whenever we think of a Gurukula, I'm sure your images may not be too much different from this, or wherever you go in India and ask an artist to make a picture of a Gurukula, he would make something of this kind, what I am showing here, a tranquil forest by the side of a flowing river and a venerable sage sitting under a banyan tree and explaining some points to his eager disciples. This picture, why it continues to this day, is you can easily see that this itself is a cultural heritage in this country. It is in our societal memory or the subconscious memory for 3,000 to 4,000 years. And that is why if you ask for Gurukula, whomever you ask, even a child may scribble something similar to this. Now, there are institutions even now who call themselves Gurukulas, and they try to inculcate some of the ambience which have been there, particularly the environmental ambience they are able to replicate. For example, a river, a forest, a garden, trees, and all that. But whether they are able to bring in the ambience of the older Gurukula, that is a question to be further discussed and seen. Now we get a picture of the, there is a ribbon here. Can I push it back? Now about the Gurukulas, we get a picture of these Gurukulas in the Upanishadic text, that is the Vedic text themselves. So one may ask, what is the evidence you are having to describe these Gurukulas and the environment or the contents in them? These Gurukulas, the Vedic Gurukulas, were purely private and free. The aspirant had to go in search of the knowledge, and the teacher was obliged to impart that without any consideration for monetary benefit. So it was a free acquisition of, it was a free education. It was a very ideal utopian kind of thinking, but it was free. Acquiring and transmitting the knowledge bequeathed by the most ancient Vedic rishis was the primary goal. The aim of these Gurukulas was to simply continue the previous culture. Whatever the teacher had inherited from his teachers, he wanted to transmit it to the students so that the students transmit it further. That was considered the primary goal. And this consisted of the Vedas, a few associated ritual texts, and the Upanishads. This itself is a large corpus, maybe about 200 books. Even from today's consideration, it's a very large corpus. But all this was taught and learned orally through specialized methods of memory training. They were skill-based, so the memories, the skills needed, the training needed for memory were all given. The stay in the Gurukula was training and harmonious living with other students, helping the household, sharing the labor in taking care of the cows, watering the fields, etc. There are incidents in the lives of the students who are very famous, like Uddala Karuni, Satyakama Jabala, Nachiketa, and others, that are inspirational examples for single-minded devotion to academic work ethics. Whatever work ethics the teacher had given to them, for example, Satyakama Jabala, you would have heard his story very well. He did not know who was his father, but he came and told the teacher that I don't know who is my father. So the teacher appreciated his love for truth and called him Satyakama. And then his mother was Jabali, so he was called Jabala, and he was taken as a student. And you know, the kind of work which was given, even though they were physical, they had a close interaction with the environment, the fire, with the cows, with the birds, with the rivers, with the trees. And many times there are stories how the students were instructed by the birds, by the cows, or by the fire, or by the river. They got some information from these, and their life became kind of illuminated. And there are also slightly formal issues in these ancient Gurukulas. For example, the Shikshavalli in the Taittiriya Upanishad, this incidentally is used as an invocation in some of our universities, even to this day in the convocation day. Many of our universities, I've heard, including JAIN University, uses this. And it is replete with ethical and moral principles behind the Gurukula system. So the ethics of the ancient Gurukula can be easily understood by this, the hymn. It's called a hymn. Actually, it is something like a text. The occasion in the ancient time was the student was leaving the Gurukula after about 12 years of training. He had stayed with the Guru as a family member. And at the completion of the studies, the teacher affectionately addresses him as Antevasi. Antevasi is one who lived in my home, very near to me. So that is how he addresses him. And then the precepts are very well known. The Satyam, Vada, Dharma, Chara, and all that. Tell the truth, practice the Dharma. That Dharma was actually ethical life. And don't be idle in self-studies and teaching. So the student, after going out, whatever he may be doing that. Maybe they learned Vedic learning or maybe some other skill-based learning. He has to teach that and he has to do self-studies. Even after this, we can call some kind of graduation. And it further enjoins the mother, father, like Matur Deva Bhava, Pitru Deva Bhava. The teacher and the guest should be respected. And the Guru instructs. Again, a question of an ethical behavior comes in. Only such actions that are considered ethical should be carried out and none others. So the society comes into picture here very closely, and what the society had considered ethical only should be continued by the student. This was already inculcated by personal examples by the teacher because the student stayed with the teacher. And the Guru always instructed by the personal examples. And this instruction is very interesting. Follow us in our good conduct, that the student is asked. The teacher should be followed when anyway he has learned for 12 years, but still only in our good conduct you follow us, not otherwise. And if you meet someone better than us, better than me, that is better than the teacher, honor him, give him a seat. That's what it says. Go forth and live according to these principles. So the doctrinal aim of the Gurukula system was to impart knowledge that illuminates the student. There are so many stories of self-illumination. So it was mainly a spiritual-based education which was there. We'll not go into all those details. But they had to live in peace in the society, imbibing a sense of harmony with nature. That was very important. At the same time, the spiritual, intellectual, and cultural heritage of the country was nurtured further to be passed on to the next generation. This is what perhaps one may call an Indian ethos, that you have to pass on what was best from our previous period that has to be passed on to the future generations. The student was trying to conduct his future life as a responsible citizen of the society. See, the above picture of a mutually respectful and loving relation between the teacher and the disciple for the benefit of the society emerges from the Vedic text directly with very great force. Even in translations, this comes out wonderfully. These principles are enshrined in the Upanishads that form actually the last part of the Karpas, Vedic Karpas. So as I said, there are about 200 large-sized books or so, what may be called the Vedic Karpas. This is in the last part. But all this was learned by rote, that is by memory. But the meaning of this was clear and already elucidated by the personal example by the teacher. Now, slowly, the system changed. You come to the changes which happened. The ancillary subjects for preserving the Vedas, like you have to understand Vedic mantras, so that is an intellectual effort. Then grammar had to come into picture because the syntax had to be understood. Then, there are different interpretations that may be given to some of the hymns. So differences of opinion arose among the sages or among the ritualists and the intelligentsia. Some people telling that rituals are not important, but some others telling, no, they are also equally important. So in the Vedic period itself, there are what are called the text called the Brahmana text. Brahmana texts are only ritual texts. And everywhere there are a group of people called the Brahmavadins. So the Brahmavadins and come and question the ritualist. What is the meaning of this? What is the meaning of that kind of thing? And also migration of people to different regions of India would have contributed to the changes in the Gurukula system. So the Vedic curriculum changed somewhere around 1500 BC. So I'm talking of a very ancient time. So the previous period was somewhere from 4000 to 1500 or whatever. So the specialized subjects came into picture, including astronomy, divination, maybe some kind of astrology also, but logic was very important. And ethics, as I said, becomes to some extent subjective. So there are differences of opinion on that. Then law, how the king should control the kingdom, what are the rules and regulations. This also became very important to the community. And hence, the different group of people were needed in the community for continuing what in those times it was called as Sanatana Dharma. Even to this day, this word is used as an equivalent of an ancient perpetual culture. This could be called nowadays the Indic or the Indian civilization. So these questions became important, and this had to be filled up through an education system only. And we are talking only of the Gurukula system here, but there are difference of opinion arose. There is a principle, the original principle, that whatever the Vedic rishis had bequeathed, that should be unconditionally continued in the same form. There can be no changes on that. Whereas there are others who are telling some new subjects are also there, which are important for the country. They should also be promoted. So there was a kind of a bifurcation in the education system. There are purely orthodox Vedic Gurukulas. And these Vedic Gurukulas, the orthodox Gurukula Vedic education, was carried out by a very small but determined group of Brahmanas as an immutable ideal and the goal of life. For them, the only goal of life was to keep on repeating and preserving this oral tradition continuously, which comes up to this day. Then there was also another group of people who started their own Gurukulas. It was not supplanting the older system, but it was another branch of this same Gurukula system where little bit of Vedas were studied, maybe a few things which are needed for their religious purposes, but they went into sectarian subjects, modern subjects of those days, including carpentry, making shilpa, making iconography, and poetry, prosody, and so many other subjects. So somewhere till about 1000 BC also, this was happening, this situation was there. And this system, this trend of the bifurcation gained momentum from about 500 BC. That's mainly because of the Buddhist and Jaina schools arose in different parts of the country. Now you can see that if the Vedic people, the original promoters of the Vedic education, they questioned their own subjects and wanted to know the meaning, there are so many hundreds of others who were questioning. And you should know that it is not the Brahmins who were the leaders in those days. Even the Kshatriyas were also leaders. And many of the Brahmins had to go to Janaka, who was a king in Mithila, to understand higher level of philosophy. And it was a kind of a coexisting culture where knowledge and illumination was considered the most important ideal in life. But the separation widened and widened with time. That was inevitable. And somewhere around 300 BC or so, maybe slightly earlier, script came into picture. Till that time, everything was oral, everything was transmitted only orally, and oral tradition was considered the best system up to that time, because memory was considered an extraordinarily important faculty. Now, once script came into picture, the scope of education enlarged in the Gurukulas also, which retained the oral tradition, but scholarly works people started writing. You can't prevent intellectual people doing their creative work. Enormous, large number of manuscripts started coming out. In fact, it is said that there are about 5 million manuscripts even to this day, which are yet to be published, which are yet to be seen. A few of them are hundreds, maybe thousands have been published, but the remaining 5 million, what they are, and in fact, is the largest collection in the world for any country to have so many manuscripts, which were written on palm leaf, on other kinds of perishable material till about 18th century. After that, slowly, printing came into picture and writing on these perishable materials has vanished. And you have to add to this the enormous number of inscriptions, the stone epigraph inscriptions and copper plate inscriptions, which also give so much of information, which are educational actually. Because they mention about the eclipses, they mention about the position of the stars, the planets, and so many other interesting subjects. So the Gurukulas, they started to be called Patashalas or tolls. They were forced to have students at elementary level also for the 3 hours. And also students studying the advanced level subjects, astronomy, logic, philosophy. So this is a change. And naturally, the ethics also changed a little bit. And the teacher-student relationship also changed. And a new geographical or a spatial variation came into picture. Clusters of Gurukulas arose. Gurukulas were even up to about 200 BC run by single teachers or maybe 1 or 2 juniors along with them. But then clusters started. Several people in the same place started, but individually. For example, in a pilgrim center or maybe near an important town or in the capital of a country. So this became slowly bigger and bigger, and a kind of organization set in the system. To trace all of this will take a lot of time, what kind of organization. But you can easily imagine the Buddhist viharas that were primarily monasteries arose for educating lay people also. Initially, the Sangha is the Buddhist Sangha. Sangha means an organization. It was meant for the monasteries, for a monastic life. Slowly it enlarged after from monastic education or the religious education. The lay people were also allowed to come and study there. And this spread all over the country. In Karnataka, we had by that time already in 300 BC to 200 AD, Jinalaya or what are called Basadi in Kannada for the Jain monks. And the Jain householders, the teachers, for example, near Shravana Belgola, Mudabidre and other places, very well known, they imparted education based on ethical tenets of Jainism. So the ethical tenets of the society got modulated. They did not 100% change from the Vedic ethics, but they imbibed some new concepts or new variations of the older ones. And in the south, they are called what are called Gatika Sthana. Gatika is actually a time measuring instrument, a pot, which as the water flows out, one can measure time. And time measurement and then hitting the time was one of the important professions in those days, in about 300 AD up to even 1800 AD, till the British came. In fact, some of the British museums had this Gatika in them because the initial British clocks were not as accurate as these Gatikas. Anyway, these Gatika Sthanas also were called, were actually schools where the arts and sciences of the day was given primarily in Sanskrit, including the Vedas. So you can see that all over the country, there were schools and colleges of various levels, lower level, higher level, middle level, of the Hindu kind, of the Jaina kind, and of the Buddhist kind. The Jaina and Hindu schooling was at the grassroots level. In fact, this is very important effect. Whereas the Buddhists, they went in the direction of organization, and increasing the numbers and the size of this, their schools and colleges. Now, we don't have any much direct information of how these organizations were there in the particular period I am telling, about 500 BC to 700 AD or so. But we do get information from Chinese travelers and also some literary texts in Sanskrit. And now, of course, by archaeological investigations, excavations. One of the very important town, very famous, you would have all heard about it, that is the Takshashila, famous from the Mahabharata time, the capital of the Gandhara country. And this is the excavation which is there. And this was not a university, even though some people call it a university, but that depends on the definition you give. There was no organization as per the Chinese people who have written about it. They were all individual Gurukulas. There are about 100 Gurukulas or so, and students and princes particularly, they would come from all over India. Banaras was still not such a great center in about 700 BC for education. It was a religious center, all right. So they all went there to study, and there are records available in this text, and it gives a very interesting picture. But this was destroyed by the invaders, by the Hunas or the Huns, somewhere around 500 AD. After that, it became dilapidated. And Hyun Song, when he visited Takshashila, he says the whole stupa was in ruins. Now, a very important evidence of the education and the Gurukula system that we have from of that period is from Arthashastra of Kautilya. Kautilya was, or Chanakya was educated in Takshashila, generally called Taxila in Greece. And maybe right now it is in Pakistan. There are many famous people, Panini and Bharata and several others, it said they were trained in Takshashila. Now, Kautilya's view on education, even though it was mainly with reference to princes, very interesting. He says all education can be put in 4 fields or 4 headings called Anvikshiki, Trayi, Varta, and Dandaniti. Of course, he was more interested as the prime minister of the Maurya kingdom in the government. And he says that Anvikshiki is the rational subjects. They are the yoga, the Sankhya, and the Lokayata. Lokayata is atheism. That is rationalism. So these were the rational subjects. They added a few more. There are subdivisions on that. Trayi was actually the Vedas, the rituals, and the religious texts, which was important for the community. Varta is all about trade, that is the current affairs, commerce, agriculture, farming, and allied subjects. The art and science of the government was Dandaniti. By implication, all these were taught in Takshashila for the aspiring princes in the Gurukulas there. So he gives a little bit more of the way the student life has to be conducted in, essentially in the Gurukulas, perhaps in the Takshashila. The princes had to recite the sacred text. There is a ritual of fire worship for them. There's a celibacy they have to follow. Begging food for self and for the future teacher. This would introduce humility, and this was a Vedic custom. And we know that till about 100 years back, many poor people would come and beg students food, and it was given freely, either in the individual houses or in certain common places. So Kautilya also prescribes a continuing education. After coming back from the Gurukula, what is the timetable for the princes and other officers in the system? But a very interesting thing, he had nearly some 24 superintendents in his government for agriculture, tax collection, elephants, horses, military, and revenue collection, villages, and for liquor and all that. And all of these needed good education and skills, but he had none for education. He did not have any superintendent for education. And seems that he decided that no department of education is needed in the governments. This is something which may be an exaggeration, but this has to be thought about. The later kings in India, they followed this system. They did not interfere in education at all. They supported education. So the Buddhist viharas, particularly, what I'm talking about, Nalanda, Vikramshila, Vallabhi, Varanasi, Ujjaini, Kanchi, several others, and many learning centers in Karnataka. For example, near Shivamogga and Bijapur and those places, they all grew in this manner only. But the pinnacle of education in those days, it was considered Nalanda, at least by the Chinese travelers. There are at least about 30 travelers who came to India during the period up to about 700, 800 AD. And this Nalanda was started by a Hindu king. There's Kumaragupta in 430 AD. And the education was mainly Buddhist, or the leaders were Buddhist, but Hindu education or the Vedic education, it was essentially Sanskrit. That was the medium of instruction. That was also given. There was no difference between the two. So the infrastructure of this is mind-boggling. They had 7 large halls, 300 lecture rooms for teaching. The Chinese travelers have left a glorifying image of Nalanda. Say, when Itzing came in 7th century, he says there were 3,000 monks in residence. Many of them, about 1,000 of them were teachers, and about 5 to 6,000 students, many of them staying in the hostels. It was not sectarian. The other subjects were also taught. Now, enlightened kings and others, they followed the same system. Whether they supported the learning, whether it is Vedic or whether it is this or Jaina. Invariably, students got free education with stay, food, and clothing, some simple kind of things. So numerous inscriptions and evidences from all over India provide a dynamic state of the old Gurukula system, sometimes organized around temples, some with hospitals. There are 2 Gurukulas near Chengalpet in Tamil Nadu, around a temple actually, but they had hospitals attached to them. Some isolated people were also there, intellectuals, who said, we don't want any of this. I will simply run my own school. And they also continued with the basic prestige only. Now, large number of books were written during this period. And there is a very, I will take another 1 or 2 minutes to complete my talk, Professor Sridhar Murthy. Banabhatta, who was in 7th century, he was the court poet of Harsha. Sri Harsha was a very famous king. And he was visited by ambassadors from China and other countries also. He discusses about a famous Gurukula, an isolated Gurukula in the Vindhya forest. He says that was the hermitage of a Buddhist recluse in the forest of the Vindhya. His name was Divakara Mitra by name, who was a Brahmin by birth and education. So the reputation of his learning drew to his out-of-way and remote retreat students all possible schools of thought and belief. There were Buddhists, there were different varieties, Buddhist, Hinayana, Mahayana, Vajrayana, and others, perched on pillars, dwelling on bowers of creepers, maybe an exaggeration, but there is the poet who is writing it. And he further says, there were Jains in white robes, there were worshippers of Krishna, there are ascetics of various orders, Lokayatas, there are the atheists, Vedantins, followers of Nyaya, institutes of law, that is the Dharma Shastra, Puranas, and all of them diligently following their own tenets, pondering, urging objections, raising doubts and resolving them, discussing and explaining moot points in perfect harmony. I've taken this translation from a very famous book by Radha Kumud Mukherjee, Ancient Indian Education, published in 1947. So, inculcation of humility was the main purpose. Piety, personality development, teaching learning process leading to self-illumination. So the teacher was obliged to teach the rich and the poor without demanding money. If this was the ethics of the teacher, the student had the moral obligation to give the teacher his due in cash or kind after completing his education. So the society as the primary stakeholder in educating its youth had the commitment to support the education system by providing land, clothing, and food. These 3 pillars of the ancient Gurukula resonated with mutual respect for perpetuating the Indian heritage of Dharma. So the Gurukula system was an instrument for this. By ideals grew into large-sized monasteries, temples, and also eventually flowered into reputed centers of learning, attracting students from long distances. Now, this is, as an engineer, I thought I would put up a diagram, graph, to summarize what I was talking so far about. So the Gurukula education was a oral Vedic learning prior to 1500 BC. Somewhere around 1500 BC or about, it bifurcated into 2 streams. One was the strict Vedic tradition. It is only teaching the Vedas by repetition, by oral tradition, which of course was very mechanical, and naturally many did not take to that, And they went in this direction, the intellectual, more intellectual kind of questioning tradition. And for about 500 BC to 800 AD, that was the best part, I would say, of the intellectual development in this country. Innovative, new, totally new discoveries, inventions, whatever you may call, that happened in this period by the combination of the interaction of the Jain, Hindu, and the Buddhist. All the three interacted and they reached a peak. This education system reached a peak around 1300 or so. Now, why I'm putting up 1300? Because the organized Buddhist, the university, the Nalanda, Vikramshila, and prior to that, even Vallabhi, they were all destroyed by the invaders. Bakhtiyar Khilji killed, in fact, there are evidences, about 3,000 monks were beheaded in Vikramshila and about 1,000 in Nalanda, like that. And what you can expect? So Nalanda became around 1347 AD into just a ruin like this. It become a UNESCO World Heritage. So you may ask, now what is it that in the Gurukula system has contributed to world education apart from Indian education? Two things. One is, this is a tangible World Heritage Site recognized in 2016, the Nalanda Mahavihara, which is being now, I understand, reworked and continuing as a new university, an international university. The second was the UNESCO Intangible World Heritage that has given to the Vedic tradition, which is still continuing. You can see the Vedic tradition line is here. It has not died out. It did not peak. It did not go down. It is more or less constant. The number of adherents are very less even to this day, but it continues. It is a different question whether what is the use of it, what is the advantage. I'm not going to discuss that. But after the Nalanda, the Buddhist education more or less vanished from this country. It is the Westerners' argument that the others push the Buddhists out. That is not true. When the peak organizations went out, so the whole system, there was a sudden collapse in that. But the intellectual work and the Jaina and the Hindu education system continued because they were at the grassroots level. They did not have very huge organizations, except some temples bore the brunt, but the intellectuals and others escaped this because they were small scale. And this continued up to about 1800, and beyond that, the situation what we are having right now. Thank you so much. This is what I wanted to make present for your consideration and for pondering and discussion whenever it is possible. Thank you.
Thank you very much, sir. In fact, one of the listeners has sent a message saying amazing exposition. I can't agree more with him. It is a lucid and eloquent discourse, and certainly a lot of questions also may be there in the mind. We could take it, subsequently, if you are available. The